We wanted to go to school, but it was stopping us because of the treatment that we're getting. And it wasn't good. You know, it happened to all the students in the school, not only us. It happened to those other students too.
They make you wear these gowns, stripped. You got no clothes on underneath the gown. So the fondling with the priests started there. There was quite a few of us and trained as altar boys, but nobody ever talked about what happened.
The allegations are disturbingly familiar. Indigenous children abused, raped, tortured, all while attending school here in Duck Bay, Manitoba. The old 4-room schoolhouse has long since been torn down, but for the students who attend it, its memory still casts a dark shadow over the community.
Either abused physically, mentally, sexually, you name it. The same thing that happens with the Indian day schools, the residential schools, we were treated the same way. No difference.
Tonight we travel back to Duck Bay, where a handful of former students are fighting for recognition. The federal courts recently approved a $1.4 billion settlement agreement for Indian day schools. But the survivors of Duck Bay have been excluded from the process, and they're not alone.
It was just a vicious circle of abuse from the day school to the reform school to the sanatorium. Wherever you were sent, you were abused.
Duck Bay, Manitoba, a small indigenous community on the western shore of Lake Winnipegosis, 5 hours north of Winnipeg. Most of the people here have heard stories of the Duck Bay Special School number 2163. Many of the community's elders are former students.
When they brought in the church, you had to start going to a thing they call catechism every day at 4 o'clock to the church. And me, I was taught to be an altar boy. And this is where the abuse started.
It's been over 60 years since George Monroe attended class at the Duck Bay School. The Anishinaabe elder calls Winnipeg home now. But no matter how many years pass and how far away he gets, the memories of the abuse he witnessed and suffered still haunt him.
The abuse that I experienced was always private. Like I say, I was a Catholic boy, altar boy, so they have their private rooms where masturbation took place. And anal penetration, whatever, rape, whatever you want to call it, that took place. But we never talked about it because we were ashamed. And
built in the early 1950s, the school was run by the Roman Catholic Church. And just like the residential schools of the day, the ultimate goal was assimilation and genocide.
So the school was bad. The abuse was bad. The nuns were involved. The priest was involved. They'd take boys to church. The man priest would take the boys, and the nuns would take the girls. I don't know what happened there, but according to their stories, they were abused the same way.
The Duck Bay School is what's known today as a day school, meaning the children were allowed to return home at the end of each day, back to their families. But in many cases, they were either too ashamed or too afraid to tell their parents about the abuse. Former students like Abraham Parantu.
But that's where I got physically abused at that school, at the time when I went to school. I didn't want to tell anybody. Nobody knew. Not even my parents knew or anybody knew, because I didn't want to cause a ruckus or let anybody know what I was going through. And I was ashamed because of what they did to me.
The abuse was severe. Parantu remembers children being strapped with a thick piece of rubber transmission belt, while others were tied up outside with dog leashes as a form of punishment.
That's where everything got started. It wasn't a good picture, and I witnessed everything that happened. They even brought in. They even got some people, some students of ours. They pulled their pants down and whipped them with a board right in front of the class, and that's just to shame them to not to speak their language or not to do the things that they're asked to do.
The residential school era is known for its cruelty and inhumane treatment, to kill the Indian in the child, and day schools were much the same.
We were called also savages. That when they called us that name, some people didn't understand, because they used the French dialect, like les sauvages. So my mom is part French, and I asked my mom what that word is, that they're calling us at school. And then my mom was, and it was kind of surprised. What? And I said, les sauvages. He says, they're calling you savages.
In 2008, the federal government apologized for their role in the residential school system. The settlement agreement was the largest class action in Canadian history and covered 140 distinct institutions. Day schools, reform schools, boarding homes, Indian hospitals, and sanatoriums were all excluded from the process. In the years that followed, over 9,000 people have requested that 1,530 other institutions be added to the agreement. Of that number, only 7 have been acknowledged. APTN Investigates filed a number of access to information requests to find out the reasons behind each exclusion. The government responded by asking for an extension. Fast forward to today.
This agreement will bring us one step closer to a lasting and meaningful resolution for survivors and their families of this dark and tragic chapter in Canada's history.
In August of 2019, the federal courts approved a $1.4 billion settlement for Indian Day School survivors. Up to 140,000 former students are eligible for compensation, with more than 700 institutions officially recognized. The Duck Bay School was not on the list.
How can you have reconciliation and justice in Canada if half of the abused people that have been abused and raped are not recognized, including the people in the sanatoriums, the people that went to reform school, and the people that went to private schools that were all run by different church organizations.
All told, there are more than 680 institutions that were left out of the settlement agreement. And the reasons vary. The most common being that the schools were funded or operated by either provincial governments or church organizations.
They told us that we're not eligible. So since that time, we've been fighting to be recognized and to to tell our story of what happened, and to let the the whole Canada know exactly what we went through.
And it's here at the Provincial Archives of Manitoba that their search for answers begins.
Okay, now 1955.
Monroe and Parontu have spent untold hours trying to find any piece of evidence that points to federal involvement.
Well, George, I found some pictures here from that we could go through.
The most they've been able to come up with are old attendance records and photographs of the church and schoolhouse. To get to the truth, Parontu and Monroe have decided to travel back to where it all started.
George has been very active in this process, and we formed up an organization called Unvalidated Day School Society of Canada, and we are fighting to get these other people compensated from the wrongdoings that the government has imposed on them, and they excluded us from that process. So we are working on that, and I'm here to pick him up. Hello, George.
Hey, sir.
We're ready to go. So how do you feel about the trip we're going?
Well, I don't know. It's going to bring back a lot of memories here.
Yeah.
A lot of abuse that took place. I mean,
It's going to be
we have to
quite
do
exciting to meet those people again, and to get everything, complete. So this will be our last trip to get it done.
I hope so.
So hopefully you're ready to go.
I'm ready to go.
Okay, let's go.
When APTN Investigates returns, Abraham Parontu and George Monroe take a journey through the past.
Well, this is it. We're coming in.
Yep.
Abraham Parontu and George Monroe are on a journey through the past. The two men have made the trip from Winnipeg to Duck Bay, Manitoba many times over the years, mostly to visit family and loved ones. But today is different.
There's the school.
There's the school right there.
There's the church.
Yeah.
All's missing.
That's the one.
The community has changed little over the years, and it doesn't take long before the memories come rushing back into focus.
This is where all the abuse took place, except that Duck Bay School. It was St. Thomas Aquinas School, Catholic school. They changed the name in most probably 1965 when Frontier moved here.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the Canadian flag, it was the Union Jack.
Yeah, I know. That
Under
Duck Bay
British.
School was on the other side
Yep,
too, not
on the other
this
side. Yep.
That's where the church was, right here.
Yep. All the way.
And
The hall was on the
theater.
other side, the theater, yep.
This open field is where the old Duck Bay Church was located. It's also where George Monroe first remembers being sexually assaulted. He was only 7.
It's a little difficult for me because what happened in this building and abuse by the man of the cloth that's supposed to protect us, and he's the one who raped us and abused us. So I could feel it in here every time I come here. I feel it every time I come to a funeral in this church of one of my relatives or somebody that passed away, that we have to put away because of what happened in this building and that building there.
This is the Duck Bay School today. It was built where the old four-room schoolhouse once stood.
Well, Duck Bay School. So, look at the trophies. Everything is here. Pictures. Yep. And there is Father Libertine right here.
What do you think of him having his picture up here?
I don't think so. It should be taken down. It doesn't show respect to the community for all the damage that was done here.
Yes.
It should be erased.
Each corner of the community has a story to tell. Just down the road from the schoolhouse, another empty lot. Once home to a small log cabin that was used to teach the children of Duck Bay from 1929 to the early 1950s. It's where George Monroe and Abraham Parantu played as children before the church came to town.
Well, nothing really started happening until that school was built when we were transferred to that school.
And the church and the nuns come here.
And when the nuns start moving in to the town, and they had a convent there, and they were the teachers, and Father Libertine was the person in charge of the school curriculum, probably, and he probably incorporated the same principles that he left behind at Labret, Saskatchewan when he was in charge of it. He was he was in charge of Labret, Saskatchewan residential school. So he came here, incorporated the same things, worked with the nuns. The nuns were there, came in to assimilate the community, take away the culture.
Kill the Indian and the child.
Yeah, and change them.
Yep, that's true.
So that's what, basically that's what happened.
Duck Bay is a small, tight-knit community, and family ties here run deep.
Hello, Donald. How are you?
We were in town for less than an hour, but word quickly got around.
We're back again.
And a number of community members, former students of the Duck Bay School, were waiting for us when we returned. Most just wanted the chance to share their stories, something that has been denied to them for far too long, of the children they were and the harms they endured.
They used to put my hands in salt water and then give me a strap, and they were just swollen. And I was only a kid, like no pity, and especially that guy teacher always giving me strap.
I used to work a lot for the nuns, like hot water and that. And then one time I accidentally knocked the statue, Blessed Virgin Mary. And then they really got mad and they burnt. And that's probably, I don't know what they burned me with that time. Because one of the nuns had her hands like covered my eyes.
It seemed like everything was normal because we had that pretty near every week or sometimes every day, straps, and a lot of times they were lined up and having each one of us having a strap. And the nuns, they had two straps. One was red and one was black. If they didn't make you cry on the black one, they used the red one. And the red one was the real stinger.
I was 9.5 years old. He would have sex with me. And he told me when I get older, I would like this. he would take me out of the school at 3 p.m. along with the other girls and take us to the church to sexually abuse us.
As the sun starts to set on the community of Duck Bay, Abraham Parantu and George Monroe still have a long journey ahead of them.
I was a victim. I experienced all the things that they were doing, and that's why I wanted to share my story, is to let the people know now. And I didn't want to continue hiding what happened to me.
The two men aren't sure where the road will ultimately lead, only that their battle for recognition is just beginning.
I don't know how we're going to correct this. I know there's a lawsuit going on, but how can the government of this country talk about reconciliation if the class action that's being presented today only has 700 schools? So where's the justice?
Join us next week for Broken Circle Part 2.
The federal government is arguably responsible for any of the maladies that are brought about upon the Indigenous population in Canada.
A decades-long battle for recognition comes to a head.
They can't just, walk away and say we were not involved. You know, what kind of people are these?
And a warrior picks up the fight.
The government is wrong when you do injustice, and they have a fiduciary obligation to make it right.